Greetings, and welcome to the discussion M365 Cyber Hygiene, built-in and bolt-on techniques. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is J. Peter Bruzzese, and I'm an 8-time awarded Microsoft MVP for Exchange and Office 365. It's wonderful to be with you folks today. I'm also co-founder of Clip Training, which is a provider of partner and customer portals with technical training content that focuses on Windows, Office, and Office 365, as well as security and other things. I'm a technical author with over a dozen books sold internationally. I'm a technical speaker, a journalist for InfoWorld and others, an instructor for Pluralsight, and last but not least, a Mimecast strategic technical consultant and techvangelist. I would tell you what I do in my spare time, but as you can see, I haven't had spare time in 2 decades or more. Okay, so let's get started.
Some key takeaways for our discussion today is, first of all, a quick review of the current M365 landscape. Second, we'll talk about cyber kill chain focus points from the gateway to the end user. Then we'll talk about zone defense, offense strategy going beyond the traditional perimeter. Okay, so let's get started. There's no doubt that Microsoft has developed the greatest business productivity toolkit in the history of mankind. It's pretty obvious at this point. I wouldn't say that that was always going to be the case. There was a time there where I was a bit of a doubter. I was Mr. Anti-Cloud. I think everyone was at some point, thinking that this was not the smartest move to move our on-premises servers into a hosted environment with Microsoft, but they really won us over. And they did that by not only moving servers that we were comfortable with on-prem, like our email servers, to the cloud, but also developing newer solutions that could take advantage of the cloud-based scenario. So Teams, OneDrive, and so on, these things now create this perfect suite of solutions that we can benefit from. And Microsoft has seen tremendous growth over the last few years, this year in particular. As a result of the pandemic, with more and more people having to work from home instead of offices, we've seen tremendous growth in the M365 space. In fact, very early on in the pandemic, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, he said we've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months. And just recently, the report on Teams activity, they say that it's jumped 50% to 115 million daily active users. That's pretty amazing. We've seen the growth of M365 with regard to organizations moving there quickly. Some were planning to do that anyway, but others were forced to make the move as a result of the pandemic. Now, this can be viewed as a good thing because more and more people are using this incredible suite of solutions that Microsoft has created and prepared. But there are some negative aspects to it as well. Some have moved very quickly to the cloud, perhaps without being fully prepared in terms of what they should do with regard to proper configuration settings, proper migration thought, security, and so forth. And this has led to concerns on the part of many cybersecurity organizations. Here's one example. The Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, it issued multiple alerts at this point, providing security advice for companies that may have rushed out Microsoft Office 365 deployments to support these remote work environments. That's not to say that it was a bad decision. Most would agree that moving to M365 was a good decision, but when these things get rushed, there are certain procedural aspects that may get lost in the process. Here's what CISA said. They said attacks in O365 environments as a result of oversights in cyber hygiene can result in unauthorized access to company confidential information, trade secrets, and personal information, triggering notification obligations under state data breach notification laws. Keep your employees and your corporate information safe by securing your remote work environments. And wash your hands. So a little play on words there, cyber hygiene, wash your hands. You could see where they were going. But they didn't just provide this one paragraph warning. No, they actually went forward and provided a variety of different suggestions for configuration changes and such, built-in remedies, so to speak, that can help with regard to bolstering your security posture and positioning with regard to M365. And it's actually a pretty reasonable list and not very hard to implement if you know what you're looking for. So these were the suggestions, 5 of them, from the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Division. The first one on the list is multi-factor authentication. Many who rushed to Office 365, maybe they didn't realize that there was built-in multi-factor authentication. And it's not very difficult to implement, either for admins within the organization or for all users within the organization. Multi-factor authentication allows us to go beyond simple username and password. It allows us to choose another method for us to validate who we are to the M365 platform. So this is actually something that CISA recommends that we enable in order to really benefit from what's built into M365 for security. And I recommend this as well. I think the only point of caution is that at times the multi-factor authentication piece of M365, at times it's gone down. So when that happens, it's really important for you to have what's called a break the glass account. So if you're not sure what that is, I recommend that you look it up. It's basically just having an account that is not under multi-factor authentication, because in the event you have a problem with identity management with multi-factor authentication being out of commission for a period of time, it would be really important for you to be able to turn it off for your users so that they can get back in and access their solutions. So just one word of caution in that regard. The second point is ensure principle of least privilege is being used. Now, honestly, this is just straight up smart security thinking. Most IT admins who have been in the game for any period of time, they know that this is the way that we should manage accounts. We don't want to give user accounts the ability to do things or access things that they shouldn't have that privilege for. So it's the principle of least privilege. However, with on-premises Exchange servers, on-premises SharePoint servers, and so forth, perhaps IT admins have become very familiar with and they're very comfortable with how to make things happen or how to give enough access but not too much. So the principle of least privilege with on-prem servers might be pretty ingrained at this point for IT admins. But with M365, maybe not so much. That's where you can get frustrated if you have people that are trying to do things and they're asking you for help, and meanwhile you're in the middle of perhaps this migration, perhaps you're dealing with a variety of different issues, and now you're being asked to make sure people can accomplish goals in this new platform. What do? You start giving people access, like global admin permissions, that perhaps they shouldn't have. So that's a mistake. Don't do that. So it's good at this point, if you've moved to M365 and maybe you did it hastily, it's good to take a second look and see if you can kind of reevaluate who has what privilege and what access, and then make adjustments. Number 3 on the list was enable unified audit logging. This is something that's done through the Security and Compliance Center, and along with that, you want to also enable alerting. Both of these are very important because it can help you to determine who is doing what on the system, and it's not turned on by default. So you have to go in and enable audit logging and alerting, and it's not something that is just going to happen for you. You may not know that though, so this is why they've made this suggestion. And last on their list was disable legacy email protocols. Many are not aware that Exchange Online has deprecated basic authentication. So you can do a quick search for that, Exchange Online deprecating basic authentication, find the article, and then follow the steps to disable legacy email protocols. Okay, so 5 steps, and you can see how these are not super complicated, but it just helps you to take a moment, take a breath, and ensure that in moving to Office 365, you have configured things properly. What I've seen in the last 6 months is some have stuck with the default configurations, and that's a mistake because obviously there's more you can do. There are built-in pieces here that can help with greater security. There are some who have misconfigured, and again, that just may be because they did this very quickly. Or it's also possible that some who have been put in the position now of being the administrator for their business, their environments, perhaps that's not their strength, that's not their forte. Perhaps they were power users and very good with systems and such, but now all of a sudden they're handling things like administration for Teams, administration for OneDrive, things of that sort. And if they've never done this before, that could be overwhelming. So it's good to just take a breath now and see if these are things that they need to look at and configure. Microsoft has provided what's called a secure score that can also assist in this regard. So the secure score, it provides you a basic score by looking at all of the different best practices for security and things that are built in, configuration and such that's built in, and it compares your configuration and settings to best practices. Now, here's the funny thing. You might think that a lot of these things would be automatically configured and set up for you. That's not true. In fact, when you go to look at your secure score, and it's easy to find, you can just do a search for secure score and Microsoft will give you the link that'll take you right in, or you can go to security.microsoft.com and it'll take you in. But ultimately, when you look at your secure score, you're going to find that by default, it's incredibly low because Microsoft does not presume to turn these settings on or off for you. This is where you need to go in and you need to make these decisions. So, as you can see here, this is the Microsoft Secure Score. And right up at the top, the number 1 and the number 2 improvement action that you can take in order to increase your secure score is to enable multi-factor authentication. You can do that for all of your users. You can do that for your administrative roles. And here, by doing that, it increases your score by over 30%, as you can see. The score impact is 33%. So that's out of the box, one of the best things that you can do to strengthen your security posture and positioning. It's built right into M365. What else can you do? Well, there are other things that you can do and should do, especially with regard to things like email, that can help to protect your environment. Have you looked at things like SPF, DKIM, DMARC? These are things that will require some research and reading, but they're not all that difficult to implement. We'll talk about DMARC a little bit later on. But DKIM, this is something that might frighten you a little bit because maybe you haven't done this before, but ultimately Microsoft provides step-by-step for being able to set up your organization with DKIM. The step-by-step is quite simple. You can set up a remote PowerShell connection. You can copy and paste the commands right from Microsoft, and ultimately then you're provided CNAME records that you pop into your DNS. So not all that complicated. I'm making it sound simpler than it is really, but it's really not that much harder than my simple explanation. So do a little research on that, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, and you'll find that Microsoft provides some good information there on being able to utilize those pieces to strengthen your email security posture. Now, why is email so important? Well, because there are issues or problems that actually really connect into email, only email, and it really is something that Microsoft can't fix. This is a problem that's beyond them. Let's talk about this for a moment. So here, what you're looking at with M365, you're looking at a very large attack surface. With Microsoft, the number of accounts here are in the millions, hundreds of millions. And this is increasing, as you can see, especially with the pandemic. So with that being the case, although that's a positive thing in some ways, at the same time, we also appreciate that there are negatives that come from that because it brings attention from malicious actors. The more accounts that go into Office 365 or M365, the larger the attack surface. So we can see as things started to grow in just even last year that there is a correlation between the success and the adoption of M365 and the attention and targeting from malicious actors. In fact, some say that 94+% of all cyber attacks start with an email. That's from a Verizon data breach report from 2019. Now, I've actually seen that number higher or lower, but I saw one report from the Wall Street Journal say it was 97%. No matter though, 90+% of all attacks start with an email. So that being the case, this is where you have some vulnerability here. They call it a monoculture. When you use the same solution and millions or hundreds of millions are using the same solution, if a weakness is found in one, that same weakness now exists in all. It's similar to your Windows systems. If there's a weakness in one Windows system, it's a weakness for all. So ultimately, how do you resolve that? When you're dealing with a situation like Microsoft, where you have 220 million users and more, 300 million by this point, and you're dealing with the #1 spoofed brand, this is a problem that Microsoft can provide some tools for and some assistance with, but it really would behoove you to look at third-party solutions that can assist in strengthening your email positioning. This is where we move from built-in solutions to bolt-on solutions. Look, the fact is you've seen it, we've seen it, hackers see it. Uh, Over and over again, there are news articles about phishing targets in Office 365. We've seen how Office 365 is the focus of hackers and the focus as a target, and how there have been breaches, and it just goes on and on and on. So you say, okay, well, I'm aware of that. So how do we resolve this problem? Oftentimes, folks will come to me and they'll say, J. Peter, uh, Microsoft includes some security, isn't that true? Yes, they provide Exchange Online protection for free, and that's your basic anti-spam, anti-malware, some domain spoofing. And then you can purchase what's now called Windows Defender for Office 365. It used to be called Advanced Threat Protection. But that provides safe links, safe attachments, some impersonation protection, and so on. So some folks will say to me, okay, so wait a minute. Then why would I purchase a bolt-on solution? Why would I look to add another third-party solution into the mix when Microsoft provides me with security? I can either get it for free with EOP, or I can upgrade to ATP. It's a good question, and it's a fair question. For a while, I wasn't exactly sure how to explain it completely without going into deep dives on features and efficacy and so forth, but an illustration came to me, and I'd like to share it with you. It's the illustration of a fence, because in reality, that is what we're talking about. We're talking about fences. It's true. Exchange Online protection is provided for free, and for small businesses that perhaps had no email protection prior to this, or very light email protection, or simply endpoint protection, well, EOP is a step up. It provides basic anti-spam and basic anti-malware. It provides some domain spoofing. You might liken it to a 2-foot picket fence that surrounds your house. Now, Microsoft does a great job at building the house, but fences has never been their strong suit. So they say, look, for free, we'll give everybody a 2-foot picket fence. It'll keep the critters out, right? Basic anti-spam, anti-malware. But it won't do much with regard to opportunistic attacks or targeted attacks. For example, there's no attachment protection. There's no URL destination scanning, dynamic destination scanning. There's nothing fancy beyond the basics there. So you say, okay, I get it. A 2-foot picket fence is probably not what I'm looking for. I need something a little stronger. Well, for that, you're going to have to spend money, either with Microsoft or someone else. So let's look at Microsoft's offering. They only offer one other fence. It's their Advanced Threat Protection, now called Windows Defender for M365. So I liken that fence to a 4 or 5-foot shadow box fence. So what's included in Advanced Threat Protection? Well, for starters, there's safe attachments. And this is an Azure VM that will sandbox an attachment as it comes through. And ultimately, if it's a weaponized attachment, it will see if it will detonate. And then if it's considered to be dangerous, then it won't be passed on. So you say, well, that's great. That's something that we need. In a world of spear phishing and malware and ransomware and so forth, we have to be careful with those types of attachments. This is true. But again, it's an Azure VM software-based sandbox. We're not entirely sure what happens under the hood. We're assuming that there's heuristics, that there's AV signatures, and so on. But again, it's a single solution to handle your attachments. At the same time, there's also URL scanning, so safe links is what it's called. If an email comes in with a link, if it's a known malicious link, well, that will be blocked actually by EOP. But if it's a link that's never been seen before, then at the time of click, Microsoft will go out and check initially the page that is brought forward. So that's why that is better than EOP, you would imagine, having Advanced Threat Protection. But can you do better? This is where, if you're going to put a fence around your property, around your house, especially in a neighborhood as dangerous as the internet, it would be good for us to make sure that it's a strong fence. A 10-foot iron or steel-based fence with barbed wire and video cameras and sentinels and guard dogs on the other side, because we're not just looking to protect ourselves from opportunistic attacks, but from targeted attacks. At times, your organization is the focus of an attack. So at that point, it would really make sense, if you're going to spend money on additional security to bolt onto Office 365, that you would have the best security. So that's where it comes down to efficacy, and it comes down to features and then the strength of those features. So let's just talk about attachment protection for a little bit longer and kind of bring this into some real science and data, as opposed to just pictures or cartoons. Granted, for me, when I had this idea in my head, I went to my cartoonist and I had them draw it up, as most of you probably do. You probably have a cartoonist on speed dial that you call, like I do, and they draw up your idea. So that's what I did here. But we need to actually have some real proof of the difference between EOP, ATP, and third parties. All right, so here we're looking at some features that we can see EOP, ATP, and third party, or Mimecast in this case, how they're different. So with EOP, we see that there's no attachment protection. In a world of ransomware, malware, to have zero attachment protection is a bit of a mistake. That could be very dangerous. In fact, we just said 90+% of all attacks, 94% or so, start with email. So we don't want to have our email wide open to an attachment type attack. Now, with Advanced Threat Protection, now called Windows Defender for M365, you could see how there are some additional features. For example, we mentioned there's a preemptive sandbox that checks email attachments pre-delivery. That's great. We can see, however, that there are a lot of other features that are missing from the story. And that's where looking at a third-party solution like Mimecast can fill the gaps. Mimecast provides innovative solutions in this regard. For example, they have a solution called static file analysis. And what's neat about this is that, you have your static sandbox and you have your dynamic sandbox, in a sense. So the dynamic sandbox is where the email comes in and it gets checked by the sandbox. But a static solution like static file analysis, it looks at the bits and bytes of a document, and it's file agnostic, and it looks to see if there's any executable code. Think about it. If it's an image or a PDF, why would there be executable code in these things? And so it looks for executable code at the bits and bytes level, right? And if there's any executable code, it sets off red flags. So that's where we see innovation is necessary in a modern world where the bad guys, they are becoming more creative in terms of how they do things and what they can get through the Office 365 world. Well, the security folks have to be just as innovative in order to protect organizations and keep them safe. That's where a solution like Mimecast can really help to protect organizations, because they look at all aspects of email, everything from attachment inspection, as we mentioned, with static file analysis, sandboxing, and so on, URL inspection, including real-time deep inspection and analysis of page contents. So, for example, it's one thing to scan a page to see if there's malicious code based off of a link, but what about links off of that page? See, that's deep inspection. You want a security solution to go beyond the basic initial page. See, the bad guys know that. They know that these scans will scan the initial page with a URL link, but will they go deeper than that? Will they scan links off of that page and look for malicious code, password grabbers, and such? See, that's where having a solution that can do more than the basics is really key. That's also important with regard to the difference between checking off checkboxes of features and being able to gauge genuine efficacy, that is, the effectiveness of a solution. So that's where, again, when we look at what Microsoft does, 2-foot picket fence, 4-foot picket fence, we're really looking at solutions that can do more than that. 10-foot ironclad fences with barbed wire and so forth. In addition, as you can see here, this is the Mimecast funnel. Right down the middle, we have things like DNS authentication with SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. This is all very important. Impersonation protection, very important with regard to every aspect of an email being able to ensure that it's safe for the end user. And not just safe from technology in the sense that a URL or an attachment but even safe with regard to things like impersonation protection, where at times, just through savvy social engineering and domain spoofing on the back end, where it looks like an email is coming from someone internally, those together, social engineering and domain spoofing, can create a real wicked combination for your end users. They get asked to send money, wire transfers and such, and unfortunately, because they can't tell the difference with the email from it coming from the real CEO or if it's coming from a fake one, sometimes they will make the mistake and send the money. So you need to have solutions that can look at all of these different pieces and provide protection for those end users. On top of that, you also need to provide end user awareness training. It's important to strengthen that human firewall, help them to help your organization to be safer. So if something did get through your email inspection solution, the end user would be able to see things, red flags and such, that hopefully would also protect them from mistakes of this sort. Let's talk about some of the ways that you're vulnerable. There's a multiplicity of attack vectors, starting with Zone 1. Now, Zone 1, I think we've already spent quite a bit of time on. So Zone 1 is your email perimeter. This is the traditional attack zone. Spam, targeted attacks, that's where we typically see the attacks come through. But then when it comes to attacks of this sort, we also have to think about things like lateral spread. So once an attack is internal, and it's reached the internal perimeter, how does your end user either stop the attack or spread it? And that's where we have to look at things like what goes on inside your network and organization. We're concerned about lateral spread, we're concerned about human error, internal compromise. So that's Zone 2. So Zone 1, that's your email perimeter. That's the traditional perimeter and zone. Zone 2 is inside your organization. Zone 3 is beyond your email perimeter, which is where we start thinking about things like brand exploits and email domain spoofing. And then actually there's another zone. It's more a way to extend and integrate with other security controls. Now, this is more about reaching beyond all perimeters and taking a look at existing investments in security and helping them to work together. Now, personally, I look at each of these solutions as like your own personal superhero to protect in those various environments and various scenarios and situations. But when you have a real genuine threat, what typically happens is they bring a variety of superheroes together to help work together. And that's where you need a solution that can do that, that can bind these things together so that they work together to protect you. Okay, so these are the ways that you're vulnerable. We get that. And we need to talk about how we address those attack vectors. So the Mimecast Email Security 3.0 is a pervasive protection strategy. How does it do it? Well, with spam and targeted attacks, we've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but Mimecast has their secure email gateway solution and their targeted threat protection solution, which includes attachment protection, dynamic destination URL scanning protection, and it's innovative. It includes things like static file analysis and so on. So all of that helps to protect Zone 1 at your email perimeter. Now, with the second zone, human error, internal compromise, lateral spread, Mimecast provides internal email protection as well as awareness training to help strengthen that human firewall internally. With brand exploits and email domain spoofing, Mimecast provides DMARC Analyzer and Brand Exploit Protect. Now, I wanted to return to this discussion about DMARC because the interesting thing about DMARC is that you can turn it on by establishing settings in your DNS, and basically what it does is it takes advantage of SPF and DKIM, which hopefully you've already set up, and these two solutions together can be monitored and looked at by DMARC, and actually DMARC will provide a response for servers as to what they should do in the event there's a failure with regard to an email and SPF or DKIM. So that's great. But what a DMARC analyzer can do is it can actually pull in reporting so that you can see where the threats are coming from, how often are they occurring, what's really happening. So you can take your existing scenario and you can make it report only with a P equals none setting for DMARC. You can make it P equals quarantine. You can make it P equals reject. And again, it's not all that difficult to set up. But here's the thing. Microsoft does not provide a way for you to have DMARC reporting. And that's okay. They have left that open. In fact, on their website, they say very clearly, if you want DMARC reporting, you have to go find a third-party DMARC analyzer. And so in that regard, Mimecast provides that so that you can see the reporting, it gets aggregated, and you'll be able to see what's happening with regard to your threats and the implementation of DMARC in your environment. So just from my perspective as an outside consultant, I typically recommend everyone implement SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, and especially use a DMARC analyzer so that you can see the reporting. Brand exploit protect is also very important. I've actually heard from and worked with organizations where they have had their brand used to exploit folks. In fact, just last year, I met an organization, it was a school, and they had a list of potential students that hadn't been chosen yet to be part of the next year. The list was stolen. And so what they did was they emailed all of these people on the list and they told them, congratulations, you have been accepted to this school. But it wasn't from the school. It was a spoofed domain. They used the logos of the school and such, and they basically lied to these people and said, all you have to do is pay a little bit of money to get things started. Pay us $1,000. And so, of course, everybody, this is the school they wanted to go to. So everybody, paid up their money, and in the end, it turned out to be a lie. Now, granted, you could say, well, is that really the school's fault? Well, to some degree, because their list was stolen, but really it doesn't matter whose fault it was. What does that do to your brand? To have that be a headline in the newspaper that your school was used to rob money from all of these people who now not only was their money robbed, but they weren't accepted to the school either. So having your brand reputation hurt in that regard can be very damaging in multiple ways. And so that's where, again, having a solution like Brand Exploit Protect, where someone is scanning and looking for these types of threats and targeted attacks and brand exploitation, that can be really helpful and really beneficial for your organization. And then the API's ecosystem. This is where, again, having all of these solutions work together can really be valuable. And what you really need is a solution that can bind them all. And that's where, again, Mimecast has the ability to do that. Now, we're talking generically. Let's look at each of these a little bit more in depth and talk about what you don't get with Microsoft. And that is the Mimecast Edge. So, as we've mentioned earlier, with Zone 1, you have static file analysis. You have a full emulation sandbox, not a software-based one, but a hardware-emulated sandbox, which actually provides a better level of sandbox capability. Because if the attachment is aware that it's running in a sandbox, well, you know what it does. It remains dormant. So you need to be able to trick the attachment into detonating. So having a full emulation sandbox is key. There's also real-time URL analysis. And as we mentioned, we're talking about deep analysis where it goes beyond the initial page. There's browser isolation, and there's unlimited policy granularity. That's Zone 1. Zone 2, awareness training, message control, advanced outbound protection. That's Zone 2. Zone 3, brand exploit protect, DMARC analyzer, threat labs, and vulnerability research. All key. And then with the API, it's embedded in the ecosystem, it enables custom integrations, and it's vendor agnostic. So there's a lot to think about with regard to M365. There are features that are built in. There's key configuration aspects that you need to be aware of and need to focus on. There are security elements that you need to focus on, which was mentioned through the Department of Homeland Security and the Cybersecurity Division. There are things that you can do that are free that you can turn on, features you can turn on and look at. There are features like SPF and DKIM that you should look at. But at times, there's also a need to bolt on. And in that regard, we look at email being a key factor towards motivating you to look at third-party solutions like Mimecast for that bolt-on. Not just for traditional email perimeter security. No, that's very 1980s. No, but you need to go beyond Zone 1. You need to go and look at inside your organization and prepare your people beyond the perimeter with Zone 3, and then extend and take advantage of existing investments as well. So ultimately, that's where Mimecast comes into play. As a 100% cloud-native cybersecurity platform, it's built on an email security foundation. Mimecast also provides a variety of other features and solutions like cloud-based archiving, continuity, and additional security as well. But it's something for you to consider and ponder as we look at the trend of organizations moving faster and faster at an amazing pace to M365, and the need to look at security, especially email security, from a defense in depth perspective in order to bolt on better security, that 10-foot fence, to help to ensure that you can keep your users safe.
Thanks for joining me today. We hope you found that informative, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.